is not just a quest. That's a piece of it. It is the internal. Where am I emotionally? Where am I in my soul? Am I my best version of me? And there's some test and challenge that comes with that. There's some wrestling that we have to do with our identity with God and who we are. But then there's also a walking it out and finding godly men to walk with us. And I think we get to offer all of those things through Crucible.
Welcome to the Crucible Project podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
And welcome back to the Crucible Project podcast. My name is Roy Wooten. I'm the executive director of the Crucible Project. Instead of having a host and a guest, I have with me the men's ministry leader, Byron Myers. Byron, say hi.
Hey, good to be back, Roy.
We decided to have a conversation about godly masculinity, right? And just think through that together. You know, we really started back in 2002 as a man's coaching, our founder, Greg Houston, coaching business, really trying to wake men up, to help them be initiated into a community of men. And we've been addressing masculinity and men's issues all this while. And a few years back in our culture, there was a lot of press about toxic masculinity. And oh my goodness, it was almost as if there for a while, if you have any masculine traits, you are toxic in and of yourself. Do you remember that, Byron?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, so what are your thoughts around masculinity in general and toxicity?
So there is a distinct difference. In all the years that I was in education, mothers would come talk with me about sons and how they were struggling with their son. And I would invite her to understand that some of this you just don't understand because he's a boy and you're not. And so that doesn't mean we excuse terrible behavior. But he comes from it from a different hormonal place. He comes from it from a different view. God just made us a little bit different. And there's a reason, right? That's why we come back together as one. So that whole, we're just going to eliminate masculinity altogether because all of it's bad. We're just going to kill it all. Makes it hard because there are confused men walking around. Man, I feel this purpose. I feel this passion. I feel this drive, but am I okay? Am I allowed to do that? And it really makes it tough when we walk on eggshells around our masculinity. Now, don't get me wrong. There are abusive men. And there are men who weaponize their masculinity because they can be so powerful. That is not what we promote. It is this godly, what did God make us to be? I think of it this way. Are you living as your best version of you that God made you to be?
When I think about toxic masculinity, I think two things. One is in our culture, boys, have so much confusion around, especially if they're raised in a home with no male influence at all. There's not an uncle in their life. There's not a grandpa in their life. There's not other godly men in their life. They're acculturated in such a way that they hear a lot of negative things about men in general. And so the dinner table is around frustrations with men or masculinity or whatever. And they grow up and they want to somehow prove that they're a man. And the way that they do it is in some of the most harmful ways, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In our culture, so many times a boy becomes a man when he gets his car or engages in dangerous things, gets involved with people prematurely sexually, gets his first drug or alcohol, all kinds of things that don't fit what godly masculinity is. And so there's this, what I call pseudo-masculinity that really can come on board. And it's like they're proven in every way they can they're a man because they're not convinced they are in their head. And so This is the guy who's and I'm not saying everyone who looks like this is, but got everything tattooed. He's got the beard and mustache. He's got the big jacked up truck. He's got, it's just like all of this, like, those things alone don't make you a man in and of themselves.
Yeah.
It is the godly masculinity we're talking about is what's inside, So
Right.
One of them is that kind of extreme pseudo masculinity, etc. And then the other is men who have really addictive kinds of personalities who prey on others, prey on women, are out to get whatever they can in any relationship. And that includes sometimes they think that they have to use force. They're thin-skinned men. They're thin-skinned, so everything offends them, and they're ready to fight at every moment. I think Jesus had a lot to teach us about masculinity. Jesus had some fight in him. He wasn't he wasn't the good Christian boy that Mama tells us to grow up to be. He wielded a sword when he needed to. I'm thinking about the story of the woman who was caught in adultery as an example.
Yeah, that boundary he set with those religious leaders who were ready to catch him in something. And he just, okay, if you're without sin, cast the first stone. He didn't get big. He didn't get questy. He knew exactly who he was able to stoop down right in the dirt. And he sets a boundary with them.
Yeah, you talk about courage and boldness. I mean, they could have as easily started throwing stones at him. And he saves her life and shows mercy to her. That's the kind of godly man I want to be. I want to be able to set a boundary without having to get my fists up in the air. I want to know that I'm carrying a sword and I can use it, but I don't always have to. I could just put my hand on it to remind me I can do the right thing here.
Yeah. The author of Aspiration of Greatness says it well around the warrior. Said the good, strong warrior is the one who does not have to pull the sword out of the sheath. He only has to put his hand on the handle, and everybody knows. That's godly masculinity versus the toxic masculinity that just, let me just pull it out, and there's collateral damage. I used to call it daddy justice. Dad's finally tired of all the fighting in the house, and he sends everybody to bed with a spanking, whether they deserved it or not. All you hear is crying in the room, because he'd had enough, and that's over the top. That's where we've lost our control.
And speaking of control, Jesus did anger really well. I think about cleaning out the temple when profiteers were in there making money off of people's religious requirements under the Jewish law, helping people keep the letter of the law, but charging them a lot of money to do it. And Jesus didn't just lose it and throw everything out. It says, if I remember right, he fashioned a whip.
That took time. That took time.
This was a deliberate, thought-out way of getting people to hear his message without, as far as we know, in Scripture, nobody got hurt. Yeah. He turned over some tables, but nobody got hurt. Yeah, somebody didn't make as much money that day, but physically hurt. And he made his statement. I can't remember the exact words, something about my father's house, But this idea that masculinity means if somebody offends me or pushes my button, what I need to do is pop them, that I'm impulsive in my anger. That's not Jesus. That's not what we see in godly masculinity.
Oh yeah, the finger on the nuclear button, right? Ready to send them every time. I'd have to guide some male teachers every now and then in the day that when a student crossed a boundary in class, a particular teacher might want the whole thing. We need to suspend him for weeks, and we need to be this whole ball of wax, which is another interesting thing. Jesus set boundaries that were clear. Everybody knew where they were, and us as men, one of the ways where we fall out of godly masculinity is we assume people know our boundary. We don't say what that boundary might be. Then when somebody crosses it, we let them have it. Full force, and they're confused, and it looks like a bad mood rather than communicating all along. Hey, we're getting kind of close here. Maybe I haven't communicated it before, but this is a big deal to me. And then when they cross the boundary, there's a different feel to it. Man, we just, as men, tend to fly off the handle on something we assume somebody ought to know.
Yeah. Every unexpressed expectation I have will be a blown expectation. It's like
Yes.
100% in my life, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
having conversations so people know what the expectation is part of being a good human. I have this belief that one of the reasons why so many men engage in behaviors that aren't in line with who they want to be as a Christian is because they are totally unaware of their internal emotional world,
Yeah.
right? They're clueless. And so when I'm sad about something, I'm not grieved a loss, whether it was a loss of a person or a loss of a job or boys are taught not to, express any fear, but scare is a part of being human, right? We
Yeah.
feel fear. We may call it a little worried or something like that, but your alerters on something bad might be in my future. And the truth is that those emotions, Jesus shows us how to do them really well.
Yeah.
Being a godly man to me and means being aware of my internal emotional world so that in my awareness, I don't just pop and throw it out on everybody else.
Yeah.
Or get so worked up that I'm engaging in behaviors that are not the kind of man that I want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably the least shown emotion that we saw out of Jesus would have been fear, but yet he felt it going to the cross. I don't know that he feared the pain, although that might be a part of it because he was fully human, but he feared that separation from God carrying our sin, because there can be no sin in God. But we got to see fear to the point of drops of blood in his sweat.
Right.
I've got a preaching friend who says the absence of fear is stupidity. Keeps you from stepping out in the street without looking. Yeah, there's these healthy levels of those things: fear, sadness, anger. And we probably give permission for sadness in church. But I don't know that we give a lot of fear permission or we give a lot of anger permission because we're afraid of it. There's your fear right there.
At Crucible, we believe that all of our emotions aren't sin in and of themselves. I think we're told in Scripture to be angry and sin not, right? So anger isn't the sin. It's what we do with it, or our sadness. Jesus wept for his loss of his friend, and Jesus was without sin. So sadness in and of itself isn't a sin, right? It's what we might do with all of that might be the sin itself. But not knowing what your internal emotional climate is when we blow up or we engage in behaviors that we don't really want to engage in. I call those unwanted behaviors. When we engage in those things, that's where people say masculinity is toxic. Like masculinity, and masculinity isn't in and of itself toxic.
Yep, exactly. It's God-given. It's a God-given piece of us, and like so many other things, we don't master it very well. I've been toxic. I'm going to be toxic again at some point, but I don't identify as a toxic man. That's not my identity. I read a quote one time. Christians say it incorrectly. I'm a sinner. No, I'm a saint who sins. Right? There's a different identity. So I'm a man. I can be toxic, but I'm not a toxic man. But I'm a masculine man.
I think there's a challenge in our culture, and especially within the church, around what it means to be a godly man, because unlike other faiths, including our heritage of our faith in Judaism, almost every other religion in the world and many cultures have some kind of ritual of sorts that helps you know that you're moving from a boy into manhood. And one of the effects of this movement that the Crucible Project is a part of is that on our weekend, men who wonder, am I a man or not, or am I man enough or not, or am I good enough a man, can discover the truth about that.
Absolutely. And it's not just a quest, right? Oftentimes, some of what we think is we need to do some massive quest to a high mountain to become that. And it's not just a quest. That's a piece of it. It is the internal, what we've been talking about. Where am I emotionally? Where am I in my soul? Am I my best version of me? And there's some test and challenge that comes with that. There's some wrestling that we have to do with our identity with God and who we are, but then there's also a walking it out and finding godly men to walk with us. And I think we get to offer all of those things through Crucible. So, if somebody hears that we help a man become initiated into manhood, some of them may be offended by that. Well, I drank my beers and I did my, and it's not just a questing big truck thing. It has elements of that, but it really, really gets deeper inside. Who am I? Who am I? Within my godly masculinity.
If you're wondering if you are all that God's called you to be, if you are aspirationally seeking to be a better leader, to lead yourself well, to lead your family well, if you are looking for community, don't do life alone. Check out the resources at thecrucibleproject.org. And Byron and many of our good men within Crucible, our leaders, are also coaches. So you could start with a coach before going to the retreat, and there's even groups depending on what community you're in. Check us out online. And Byron, thank you so much for being a part of this and having this discussion. God bless you.
Thank you, Roy.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. Or if you're ready to get started on your transformational journey right now, you can connect with one of our Crucible certified coaches for a free 30-minute session at thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. That's thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. If you like what you heard, connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you are listening, and don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Thank you for listening.